Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this webinar, hosted today by the CGIAR Initiative on Digital Innovation. It's great to have right now 31 people online. I think more are coming while I'm giving some introductory remarks. So welcome, everybody. My name is Jonathan Steinke. I'm based in Berlin, Germany. I work for the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. I'm a digital development researcher focusing on inclusive digital agriculture services, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. So what are we joining here for today? We'll dive into an aspect that has been keeping digital agriculture in smallholder context a little slow, let's say, in recent years. So when a farmer owns a phone, we as the digital development community, digital agriculture researchers, we usually obviously see that as an opportunity for targeting information, for reaching the farmer through their phone with digital agriculture interventions. Now, often we picture the farmer using the phone in a very similar way as we researchers probably do. That means we just take for granted the farmer will carry the phone around all day. The phone is always turned on, it's always full battery, and most importantly, a single phone number remains associated with a single person for eternity. Now, many of you know that's hardly true for yourself, and it's surely not true for the majority of smallholder farmers in this planet. We know that phones are shared often between household members. We know that electricity can be scarce in some places. And in consequence, many phones remain switched off for large parts of the day. And there are many other aspects that make it quite hard to actually reach farmers on their phones, even though they have phones. So in short, the specific ways in which farmers actually use technology, actually interact with their phones in their daily lives, creates difficulties for designing and implementing effective information services in agriculture. It's really nice to see that in recent years, the digital development community has paid growing attention to digital divides. Now, most, if not all, researchers and practitioners are quite aware about digital divides related to education and digital literacy, to infrastructure. Not everyone has the same level of access to mobile network, for example, to affordability, to gender norms, and so on. But to date, at least that's my view, and we'll see what the panelists say, I don't think there's enough emphasis on understanding the divides related to the habits and behaviors of farmers around using their mobile phones. This lack of understanding can, in some cases, really contribute to the failure of digital agriculture services. So today, we want to shine a bright light on these sometimes underestimated barriers to digital agriculture. And I have no doubt that our panelists will have great ideas for addressing, overcoming, mitigating, avoiding these barriers. So I'd like to just briefly introduce the experts who are here with us online today. We have Ram Dhulipala from ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute. He's a senior scientist for digital agriculture and innovation. And prior to joining ILRI, he was with ICRISAT, leading the digital agriculture activities for ICRISAT in Hyderabad, India. I think, Ram, now you're in Nairobi, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And at ICRISAT, Ram managed iHub, an ag tech incubator. So he has quite a good overview of the sector. We also have with us Sulakshana Gupta from Viamo. She's the Vice President of Partnerships in responsible for Eastern and Southern Africa, and responsible for the growth and development of Viamo's operations in Eastern and Southern Africa. Hello, welcome, Sulakshana. We also have
Thank you so much.
We also have with us Sasha Ofori from YUX Design, a Pan-African research and design company specialized in digital services and solutions. And Sasha is the agri-tech leader at YUX. Hello, Sasha. Thank you for joining. We also have with us Phuong Minh Nguyen, based in Hanoi, Vietnam, from the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT, part of the CGIAR. And she is a mixed method researcher, an economist by training, working in the digital inclusion lever of the Alliance, where she
Is that just me, or Jonathan seems to have frozen?
Yeah, he's frozen.
Yeah,
Okay.
same here.
That's all right.
Same here.
Okay.
Yeah, likewise. So unless Jonathan comes back, I guess we could probably move to Berta's presentation.
Yes, let's do that. Okay, let me share my screen. So yeah, I just wanted to give an overview on this working paper.
Berta, sorry to interrupt you, but
yes.
I think Jonathan managed to introduce everyone except for you. So maybe you start with your introduction and then go for the presentation.
True.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah.
So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Berta Ortiz. Together with Jonathan, I'm part of the Digital Inclusion Lever in the Alliance, and we work applying human-centered design methodologies for the development of digital and non-digital tools. So our work focuses on trying to understand the needs of the users of our tools and how we can best build tools that actually serve those needs and are used by them. So yeah. And that's me, and I wanted to give a short introduction on the working paper for those of you that may not have read it, so you have an idea of what we are talking about. So let me share my screen. Okay. So yeah, this document explores the behavioral barriers that limit farmers' use of mobile phone-based services. So drawing from the experiences of 15 CGIAR researchers from 12 different projects in 10 different countries, we describe 18 unique barriers on how farmers use their phones within their specific context. While these insights are anecdotal, this working paper is meant to give them visibility, as they may go otherwise unnoticed. So we hope that these observations will inspire the development of new services and help colleagues focus on key areas when creating mobile phone-based tools for farmers. So first, I would like to give a bit of background of where this is coming from. So although mobile phones are now widely adopted and nearly every farmer has access to one, the adoption of mobile phone-based services remains low. So why is it so challenging to effectively reach farmers through their phones? In an attempt to answer these questions, we gather insights from our colleagues. And through this process, we identified 3 main categories of challenges, and I will briefly describe each group and share a few examples. So the first one is, why does information not reach farmers? So most of the barriers we have identified actually fall into this category, and this is about barriers that prevent farmers from interacting with the service altogether. Some examples are, for example, that farmers may be reluctant to pick up calls or read messages from unknown contacts, that they may not receive target advice due to phone sharing habits, or that in subscription-based services, they may miss out on them after a while due to frequent SIM card changes. The second one is when farmers do get information, why they can't access it when they need it. So farmers, for example, may not carry their phones all day long. So it can be that they missed out on relevant push-up calls or notifications. In the case of SMS-based advisory services, information is sent once, but farmers often delete the messages to free up phone memory. So the information gets lost. And the third group is why farmers, when they have the information, they don't act upon it. So it could be sometimes that farmers may not fully understand the information provided. So for example, if a message includes only the active ingredients of a fertilizer rather than the commercial name, they may not be able to act on the recommendation because they may not know what it is. But on the bright side, there are many ways to understand and address these challenges. So for example, we can conduct user research before developing the service, so we can identify existing behavioral barriers in the target population. So for example, if we find that farmers struggle with SMS-based services, it may be worth exploring alternative channels. It's also important to diversify the user experience because not all channels suit all users. Think about weather forecasts, how they are shared, right? Like they are available on TV, newspapers, and through mobile apps. Also, it's important to continuously iterate the service. So it's important to gather frequent user feedback and to make improvements over time. And the last point is also to integrate non-digital last mile delivery. So while we are focusing on digital services, it's essential to recognize where digital solutions may not be practical. Some people may not prefer mobile phones for important information, and they may need someone they trust to share the information with them. So yeah, in conclusion, while mobile phone access among farmers is nearly universal, actual engagement with services is low. And by identifying these behavioral barriers and exploring ways to address them, we hope to pave the way for more effective digital solutions that truly serve the needs of farmers. Our findings serve as a reminder that behind each technical tool, there are real people with unique challenges and preferences. So as we move in the panel discussion, I invite you all to think about the role each of one plays on bridging these gaps. How can we apply these insights to create services that farmers can easily access, understand, and trust? And which steps can we take to ensure that the future services are as inclusive and responsive as possible? So yeah, thank you, and looking forward to a lively and insightful discussion.
Thank you very much, Berta. So let's dive right in. Without further ado, I'd like to start the discussion with our panelists. And the first question, after hearing from Berta, you can unshare now, goes to Sulakshana. Sulakshana, you work for Viamo. You've held senior positions in Viamo for a couple of years. And Viamo, at least in my perception, has become really famous for their IVR services, interactive voice response. And IVR is an excellent technology for reaching population with basic phones, population with limited literacy, but it's not a no-brainer. So it still depends on how it's being done. Maybe if you could share just a few of the insights you've gathered over the last years in how successful IVR services that really reach the marginalized or low resource population, what do you need to mind to really make these solutions work? Over to you.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes.
Great. So first of all, I want to start just by explaining what IVR is for those of you that may not know. And I know it sounds like a lot of technical jargon, and it stands for interactive voice response, but very simply, it's like picking up your phone when you call a bank and you get a pre-recorded voice menu that says, press 1 for English or press 2 for a different language. Do you want to make a transfer? So you're basically calling in to a service on your phone and you're following voice prompts in order to get to the information that you might want. So that's IVR. And Jonathan and Berta, I really love this report because all of the challenges that you've highlighted really resonate with us. Farmers not wanting to learn new technology, poor eyesight, not being able to read SMS, not wanting to trust calls from unknown numbers, not wanting to download new technology. And at Viamo, we've created what we call the Viamo platform, which is basically, we think of it as Google for the billions that just have a basic mobile phone. So now some of you might remember those old Nokia 3310s that you could, smash against a wall and it would still work. So, while I might have an iPhone, there are over 3 billion users that can't use Google because they don't have a device that can get online. And many of them are farmers. And one of them is Ozzy, who is Viamo's archetypical user. And, Ozzy uses the Viamo platform in Nigeria by picking up her phone, dialing 3 numbers, 321, hitting dial. And basically that opens up a gateway of information for her. She can access information on different agriculture value chains. She can get connected to people like Yara or Syngenta to access inputs or, climate risk insurance providers. So it's essentially a marketplace for her where she can access information and she can do this on demand. So this is, I think, the most important part. And how we've overcome some of these challenges that you highlighted is that we're giving Ozzy agency. She can call the service at her time of need, anytime she wants. She doesn't have to be in the farm. She doesn't need to have her phone with us. She doesn't need to have internet. And it doesn't even have to be her own phone. She can call from any phone number to access the information, and all the content is in her local language. And we partnered with agriculture experts like, IITA, CIMIT, CIAT, ILRI, Venture 37, WFP, just to name a few, to curate this best and latest agriculture advisory that Ozzy can access on demand. And we now have 22 of these platforms, mostly across Africa, and a few in Asia. And another one of the challenges that you talked about in terms of, adoption and not wanting to, accept advisory from unknown voices on unknown numbers. So we have a pretty rigorous content development and pre-testing process where because we're not technical agriculture experts, we sit down with our partners, and I'll call out CIMIT because I know Hambulo's on this call. And, very recently we worked with CIMIT to develop agriculture advisory to reach over 1 million farmers in Zambia and Malawi. And as part of this, we unpacked what voices do farmers trust. Should the recorded voice be of an extension worker? Should it be a fellow farmer? Once it's translated and recorded, we take it back to farmers to make sure that the language is not technical and that it's, actionable and delivering the information that we want it to. So I'll stop there. And, that's, I think, how Viamo has managed to overcome some of the challenges that you highlighted.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Sulakshana. Now, you've already mentioned the combination of IVR, and you said it's the Google for basic phones. So it's kind of linking IVR to internet services, which I think is a really, really interesting development. I'd like to pick that up with Fong. Fong, you are a co-author of the working paper that Berta just presented, and you contributed some of the insights that we mentioned in this paper. One of them is actually from the development of an app, so an internet service, and one of them is from an IVR service that you implemented. I think one was in Thailand, one was in Vietnam. So could you maybe share what were the challenges in these specific cases that you saw, just to give it make it very concrete for our viewers?
Yes. So maybe I just start with the IVR because actually when we did this IVR project in Thailand, it was with potato farmers, and it was actually in partnership with Viamo. So it's through Viamo platform that we implemented this. And the project was in Thailand for potato farmer with the aim to improve the delivery of extension service for these farmer. And these farmer work within an agribusiness supply chain, who is also our partner. So there's quite a lot of difficulty that we ran into. One of the main one is that the low response rate due to farmer perception that this is a scam call. And because there's a lot of scam call currently going on in Thailand, and some people actually got scammed. So there's quite a lot of suspicion toward incoming strain number. Another drawbacks is some of the things that Jonathan, you already mentioned in the introduction, is that the household can be registered with several different mobile number that belong to the non-farming household member, or like with one number, but that number doesn't belong to the farmer who is actually doing the farming. So when we do the calls and message, it doesn't reach the intended farming member who managed the farming practice that we want to get his or her opinion from. And so what we did was, in order to increase the response rate, we worked through the middlemen, who are the brokers and the agents in the supply chain, and they are frequently in direct contact with the farmers, so they have earned farmer trust and like a real face that the farmer can trust instead of a stray number that called them. And through them, we try to distribute a simple announcement flyer about the calling program, that this number calling them, and we'll ask them of their perception on this extension services, like the irrigation support, the fertilizer delivery that they have received. And with that, it would help for them to get an idea of what is this polling campaign is about, and how it will actually help them in return, because if they give an opinions on how they perceive this service to be helpful or not, then it will actually help us to deliver better service to them. Another thing that we could do is to make sure the call is from a consistent number, and ask the farmer to save this number in this contact, instead of sometime when we run the call campaign, and also because of the cost factor, like it would probably be more expensive to do it from a consistent number. Sometimes we have to use like random number campaign calls. So like each time the call would ring, it would be from a different number, and that would make it a little bit difficult to the farmer. We can also target the SMS and call campaign during the evening hours, which is when most household member would be at home, and by that, even if the household member who's managing their farm is not the one registered with the number, then there's a high likelihood that the other farming members would also be at home, and can be passed the phone to that person. So that's our experience with regard to the IVR in Thailand. And that is for non-smartphone app. And of course, we also have experience with smartphone apps. So like that is a project in Thailand, and we aim to deliver the weather forecast for coffee sustainability. So the project's called We Focus Weather Forecast for Coffee Sustainability. We delivered agroclimatic advisories to farmers based on seasonal climate forecast, and by that seasonal, I mean it's medium term, for example, 3 months. And the main challenge is that the farmer we work with in Central Highland, Vietnam, they do tend to own smartphone, but many of them use inexpensive ones, or phone with a very limited storage space. So they are quite reluctant, or they are unable to install new agriculture app due to the lack of storage, or just because the app is just not very compatible with their phone. So it would not open very well when they actually click on it. And we try to increase uptake by inviting farmers to attend the trainings on the use of the app, which we organize in the local communities. And there the field officer would explain and demonstrate to them how to use the app. And we also work through local extension, the companies that source directly from the coffee farmers, and the middlemen who source from those farmers to reach them. The last challenge in this that I would mention is the nature of our advisory is seasonal. So it is very relevant if to help a farmer to plant, like how much input or how much water you might need in this month or next few months, but it's not something that farmer would interact with on a daily basis. So after a while, the farmer would forget how to use the app, and he would just delete the app. So our solution was to combine this seasonal advisory with a daily solution. What we chose was the daily weather forecast. So we integrated it as a module in the app. And we also conducted periodic farm visits. So like twice or a year, or like at least 1 year, to track the usage of the app. Yeah, that's some of my experience from the Vietnam and Thailand project.
Thanks a lot, Phuong. Something as you were talking that really stuck with me was how important it really is to have boots on the ground, right? So you still, despite developing digital services, this was really propelled by the extension agents, intermediaries, the on-site trainings and so on. So I think that's really something to keep in mind. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'd like to pass the word to Ram from ILRI. Now, you've heard about a whole range of challenges, both from Sulakshana and from Phuong, and also from the working paper. Now, you have quite a good overview of what's happening in the agtech sector, what's being developed, and how this is playing out. So can you just give us sort of a reality check? And how far are these behavioral challenges already on agtech innovators' minds? And what are they doing to address them?
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you. And congratulations on a good paper. Sounds very interesting, Berta. Yeah, so you see, let me just frame my response in this way. There are different kinds of innovators, different kinds of actors trying to do digital innovation in agriculture, right? So you have, of course, the public sector, which is basically the NARS, the governments, partly the NGOs, social enterprises like Viamo, so on and so forth, right? So the incentives that drive them are very different from the ones that drive the incentives that drive the private sector innovators, right? From my own perspective, like I deal with the complete spectrum of the different kinds of innovators operating in this space. And honestly, things like inclusion, gender sensitive design, so on and so forth, they don't really feature in my conversations with the private sector innovators. And probably there's nothing wrong, nothing for them to blame, because end of the day, the private capital is driven by a profit motive, right? For them, and let's accept the fact. I think your paper touched on that, Berta. It's not as if a digital innovator does not want to cater to a women farmer vis-a-vis a male farmer. That's not a very conscious decision they make. It's a business decision. For them, the cost of acquiring a male customer with an access to a phone, somebody who they perceive as the decision maker, when they receive an information, that's their target audience, right? So they basically are reacting to a reality that is there on the ground. So for them, the incremental cost of acquiring a customer has to be greater than the incremental profit that they think that they can generate from that customer, right? So that's sort of a systemic problem from the lens of a private innovator. The public sector, we have slight more leeway in the sense that the public sector is driven more by social goals rather than by profit goals. So therefore, we have the ability to make very conscious choices on the kinds of clientele that we decide to serve, or we have a long gestation capital which we have the liberty to deploy in it, right? But having said that, we are also we are also aware that there is an increasing stress that somehow even the public sector, publicly led innovation, somehow we need to find a way of making them more market driven, more organically driven, so on and so forth, right? So where's the balance? How do you sort of fix some of these issues? So my own view is this, that this is how the public sector can potentially intervene to systematically also, enable the private sector to deem the, the marginalized communities as a potential good market where they can also sort of go and find the profit. So for that, from my own experience, I take great inspiration from this platform called UPI in India, which India promotes it as something called as a digital public infrastructure, where basically like in India, just to sort of go, not digress too much, but in India, the cost of doing something called as a know your customer was very expensive, right? Thanks to a digital platform called Aadhaar and thanks to something called as UPI, the cost of doing these things using digital innovations, the cost of doing it was driven so low that it becomes attractive for private innovators to start deeming those erstwhile unbankable populations also suddenly bankable, right? So this is, just like public roads, like when governments build roads, it's basically, you're in a way crowding in private sector mobility makers, car makers to come in, invest their own private capital and start creating different kinds of mobility solutions for different categories of users. So somehow I think in the case of digital agriculture also, we really need to sort of find a balance where public sector should be investing in. You create those rails on which the private sector can sort of innovate in a way so that it systematically addresses these issues of inclusion and the fruits of digital innovation not being sort of extended to these marginalized communities. So we need a sort of a very radically different approach. But just before closing on that, I do like this approach where as things stand today, probably the private sector has very little innovation, or probably they do not have the kinds of capital that will enable them to create digital innovations for the marginalized communities, right? That's where institutions like CGIAR, we are the ones who probably are at the frontier of identifying those problems and sort of creating that initial demand. Like, as we create these action for research projects and start creating these innovations, and along with us, when we sort of partner with the likes of Viamos of the world and bringing in other social enterprises, I think we are sort of unlocking and unpacking some of those potential opportunities, and more importantly, we are also bringing these issues to the fore. So that would be my response to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Ram. So if I get you right, what you're saying is that once the infrastructure improves and digital services become more affordable, then and only then the private sector will actually see an incentive in actually investing in digital services for the marginalized.
Absolutely. Because, these guys are all driven by their own calculus of profit and loss. Unless and until it makes sense to them, it can't be done. And that sense making can only happen when the infrastructure, the publicly provided infrastructure, works out the math such that it becomes more economical for them to target those populations.
All right. Thank you. Very interesting. I thought. Sam just alerted me that there are two questions in the posed by the audience, which reminds me that I should have mentioned that earlier. Everyone is invited to ask questions. If there is any question you'd like to ask to anyone specifically in the panel, please flag that out. If it's a general question, just ask, and we'll find out who will answer your question. So please feel free, everyone, to ask your questions. We'll come to your questions a little later, because I still have an open question to our last panelist, Sasha Ofori from YUX. Sasha, I think Ram already kind of alluded to your work. You and your company, you advise private sector entities in the development of their digital services. And I don't think they come up to YUX and say, we're only interested in the men with smartphones. That's all we want. I believe part of your work is actually supporting agtech innovators, agtech investors in extending their reach, in being able to reach the marginalized, the smallholders with basic phones, etc. So can you just give us a brief walkthrough of the work at YUX, and how, or what are the tools, what are the methods you apply to enable agtech to actually reach, well, the most population possible?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I kept on nodding my head whilst Ram was speaking because everything was really resonating with me a lot. I'd like to touch on 2 points. He mentioned around designing for inclusivity, which is quite a challenge when we are looking at like private sectors, like really putting their foot forward, especially within research and then designing for marginalized communities. But when we come to UX, what we really do try to do well with our clients is that we look at really pushing for at least the people who come to us and the people that we apply for. We really push the fact that we need to do the research and do it well in different ways. So I would like to touch on that. What does it mean to really do research well on the African continent? Basically, because we do work on the African continent, we really try to really understand what exactly the issues are and bring that at the forefront to the client. So maybe the client has a very one-centered view of what the problem is, but we try to like really diversify it in a way that you get to understand these are the things that are going to affect your business. We don't need to do everything at the same time, but the awareness to know that we can focus on these particular groups of people as the first stage of design, and then look at ways to design for the other marginalized people is something like really, really push for. Also in our design, in terms of like doing research well, when we're going into communities as well, we try to really go with the local context in mind. So how our organization is set up is that we have different researchers across the continent, right, who are from these countries. And basically what happens is that when we have a project, those people would be the ones spearheading these projects in those countries. But then there will be some projects where we don't have people who live in those countries or are from those countries. And that would mean that we might be lacking those local contexts, right? So in terms of really doing research well, you need to be able to have somebody on the ground who understands the local context well. Because when we are going into these rural areas with farmers, you really need to be able to build trust with them. They need to trust who you are. They need to trust you as one of their own, maybe their sister, their brother, their mother, or something like that, to be able to open up to you, to share some of their fears, their behaviors, and those kind of things. So when we are doing research, we try as much as possible to go in with the local context, search for local researchers, especially for places where we don't have like members in, we go with that. So for that reason, we've been able to build like a very strong base of local researchers across the continent, such that when a client comes and they are looking for something within a country where we do not have a base in, we have those people to go in and do that work, right? Another thing that I wanted to just touch on is around just like designing for the inclusivity. So we understand there are a lot of sectors around like designing for differently abled people, designing for women, designing for children who are supporting their parents to use these applications. All of these nuances are there, right? But perhaps the clients, as Ram mentioned, the client is looking for profits, is looking for how to maximize their business case. So our job would be to be able to research all the nuances and be able to sort of like tie it into place. How does designing for these group of people over a period of time affect your business? Right. So we try to bridge that gap to really be the user's advocate for the people who might not be in a room to really advocate for themselves, for the women, for the differently abled people, for other groups of people who might not be in the room. Our goal is to really find that data, find that information, and try and tie it into the business use cases. And really, when you talk in that kind of language to private entities, then they listen. Then they find ways of trying to incorporate these other people within the flow. And sometimes we, as I mentioned before, we advocate for the fact that, yes, you might not be able to design for these other marginalized people from the beginning, but you having the awareness that these people are also part of my target group. Yes, they might be a smaller group of people, but then if you're able to really design for them and they become a part of the pool, you're really going to sort of like increase your profits in the long run. So more like a long term kind of business case study kind of thing where we really bridge that gap. So for us, our role will be in just like being in the middle where we find a way to pull the users' insights and then pull the business case to really bridge that gap. Yeah.
Thanks, Sasha. Really exciting. I'd just like to ask you to make it to say a bit more about the methodologies you applied, because that's what I was wondering about. How do you go about? Let's say let's pick the example brought forward by Fong. I approach YUX. I offer a irrigation app for an app that supplies seasonal forecasts to plan irrigation, and I noticed, wow, for some reason it's only men, only the wealthy farmers using my app. How can YUX help me expand the reach? So what are the actual activities, methodologies YUX applies to support the extension of the target group?
Yes, I can expand on that. So usually what we'll do is more of a mixed method, depending on what the project is about. So for something like what you mentioned, we really want to be able to understand the stories and be able to have maybe a bit of the numbers to be able to back what we are saying. So we would most likely propose something that is a mixed method where we can go into those areas and then try and find that data that supports what we are trying to do. And also the profiling of the people, really, when we are sort of like looking at the people we go and do the research with, really trying to break down the different sections of profiles we'll look at. So we'll try as much as possible to include those other marginalized people that you might not have had a lot of information about, but we would include that into our research plan. And then going into the field as well, would go with local researchers, a mix of male and female, because we have an understanding that, for example, in some African countries, when you're engaging with some women, let's say like a man cannot engage with a woman within some areas, maybe like northern Nigeria or something, for example. So we would ensure that when we are going into such areas, the researchers that we are going with are properly trained to be able to really understand the sensitivity within those areas, right? And also having a mix of genders. So we already understand the systems that are in place within that place, but going with researchers that are sensitive enough to really understand what is at play over there. And also when we go in there, we wouldn't just use interviews, right? Because sometimes just using interviews might be just one way and a bit boring. So just finding very creative ways of engaging or getting the same data from the participants, but in a very fun and engaging way. So really, we building the tools to be able to do that is something that we can bring on board. We also have like a lab that we've recently developed. It's called the Noodle Lab, where we just sit down and think about different methodologies that we can use to gather data on the field that is from the African context, right? What are some of the games? What are some of the tools that we can use to collect data that isn't just like interviews and one-on-one interviews, right? So we'll bring all of that on board as well and be able to train those local researchers. And even sometimes when we're depending on the research we are doing, we recently did one in northern Nigeria where we decided to train some of the girls that we're researching with. They became like our research assistants because other girls have more trust with them than maybe with us. So we trained them and they went to do the research for us. So we really try to find like different ways of designing something where we'll be able to get the best out of what we are trying to achieve, right? So it's really dependent on what is at stake, but as much as possible, we try to bring all the resources together to be able to make it work. Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot for the detail. That's great.
Jonathan, let me jump in because I think it also connects very well with one of the questions we have from Lydia Dunga. And she's wondering if there are any clear differences between how men and women use their phones, and if we have been able to mitigate for those gender barriers that are faced by women.
May I dare circle that question to Sulakshana, because I think you will have an answer to this.
Sure. I mean, I think there is no doubt that mobile phone ownership is skewed towards men. But interestingly, what we see on our platform is quite a significant number of our users also identifying as women. And, before I go into this in a bit more detail, I want to just explain that very recently, Viamo has launched a generative AI voice companion on the Viamo platform. So, where in the past Ozzy was calling and pressing buttons and navigating voice menus, now she can ask a question in her own language. So, she can ask, how do I grow tomatoes in Zambia? And in real time, using voice to text and then text to speech, she hears an answer that's narrated back to her. So that's a game changer for Rosie because she's never said anything. She's just, been listening and she's been tapping numbers to make choices. But suddenly she's able to use her own voice and ask a question. And what's been really interesting for us is since May 2023, when this service launched in Zambia, we've seen that the majority of our users have actually been identifying as women, and that women ask 33% more questions than users that identify as men. So clearly, what's happening is generative AI and the ability to ask questions is in some way equalizing, equalizing is a big word, but maybe attempting to break down some of these barriers. I love the example of a farmer in Zambia, Martha Banda, name changed, but she called the platform between September and January over 15 times to ask questions about tomato farming. And her questions became more and more specific, and she self-trained. So she figured out, what questions would give her a generic answer, what questions would give her a more specific answer. So she was teaching herself how to use the platform better. So I think that this is something that we're seeing as a game changer, is using the power of generative AI and giving the ability to, ask questions in local languages is allowing more women to engage with our platform.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I was going through the questions, Jonathan.
Sorry.
So yeah, there is another one, Robert, asking if governments have subsidized smartphone distribution for farmers. And I don't know about that, but maybe the perspective, and maybe Sasha can add on here, that we try to take is like we try to adapt to the context of farmers, right? So if they don't have smartphones, then we try to develop something that is not a smartphone based. And yeah, maybe Sasha, you can add more to this based on your experience.
Yeah, I think it's along the lines as you mentioned, Berta. So with most of the projects that we've worked on, we work with what's currently the farmers have at hand, and we work to be able to build upon that. So in terms of what the government is subsidizing for, I guess we do not really look into that as much, but really working with what is already at hand and then building for that. And then in the case that these farmers are able to, let's say, upskill or level up and get more smartphones, then they're able to join in on the digital realm for the smartphone solution. So just using what's at hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I
really
add?
hope. Go ahead.
Go.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So I'm not aware of any governments actually subsidizing smartphone distribution, but at least in India, I was aware of an example called, so there is a company in India called IFFCO Kisan Sanchar Limited, IKSL, which was actually a joint venture between Airtel, which is India's largest mobile telecom company and mobile network operator, and Government of India. And they were basically selling subsidized SIM cards. And any farmer who can sort of buy that SIM card would be entitled to receive weather advisories for free for a certain amount of time. And you see, also, if you really think about it, today, increasingly, a lot of governments are opening up a lot of data from their around their weather forecasts, data about their, a lot of governments also have market information systems. They have systems to collect market prices from different markets. They're putting all this information in the public domain. The expectation is if a private innovator has to collect that data on his or her own, it would cost a lot of money. By sort of provisioning that in the public domain as open data, you're at least reducing the cost, that data acquisition cost for the private innovator. So therefore, that sort of opens up a possibility to create innovations at a much lower cost, and therefore address populations that might not be able to pay for those things if if the data was privately provisioned, so to say.
Thank you very much, Ram. There's a question on the chat that I find particularly interesting about women farmers who have access to smartphones, but they're mainly using them for entertainment and not for agricultural health information services. So a question is there any experiences with working on sort of the gamification of agricultural information services, making digital agriculture particularly entertaining to increase the usability? Don't know if any of the panelists has any experiences, or I see Sulakshana is raising her hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can actually talk about that. I mean, gamification has been a really important tool for us. And, I'm not talking about smartphone games. These are voice-based games where, a user calls into the Viamo platform and finds themselves at the beginning of a story, and then using voice prompts, they progress through the game. So we've done games on things that are probably not the most exciting, like soil health. We've done games on chili farming, and we find that games are really, really popular among women and especially among young audiences. I would say, the 18 to 35 demographic on our platform absolutely loves games. So we've really used games as a strategy when we think that, first of all, the information might be a bit dry and needs to be, spruced up and made a bit more interesting. Or it might be a particularly sensitive topic, perhaps related to sexual gender-based violence, or something else. So I would say that gamification is something that's been really effective for us.
Thank you very much, Sulakshana. There's Sasha, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add briefly on that, we also had like an interesting project where we did something very similar to gamification somewhere in Tanzania, and we realized very same as Sulakshana was mentioned around that gamification was very approved within the younger and the female sections. But what we realized also was that when these younger ones are playing these games, they sort of like do it together with the older, their dads or their moms, and they sort of like transfer that knowledge to them in a certain way. So although like they are the one on it, their mothers or their fathers who are much older also get to experience it through them, which was also quite interesting as well. So gamification is a very huge tool, especially getting to really bridge the gap between like the youth and then the older generation as well. So just wanted to add that as well.
Great, thank you very much. There is one question that I'd like to ask to Ram about public partnerships. Let me just search for it. I don't know the name. Laura McNeil asks, what about partnerships between private and public service providers? How likely or realistic is that solution? And I'm asking it to Ram because you were speaking heavily about the private sector investing into digital ag. But is there a chance that they can actively collaborate with the public sector to make digital ag services more inclusive? Over to you, Ram.
Yeah, undoubtedly. But again, as I said, it has to somehow be in their own interest to get there. Like, again, the classic example is, why does someone like a Facebook decide to invest in those? Some time back they were trying to invest in balloons to bring internet to places which are practically, even difficult to reach. What is in it for them? Because their investment thesis is that the more users you have in the internet, inevitably they will end up getting a smartphone which will be very affordable. Inevitably, the mobile data will become cheaper, and inevitably they will all end up on Facebook for entertainment or for their own social, media needs, so on and so forth. So fundamentally, even in this case, if inclusion has to be a very organically driven business decision, there has to be something in it for them, right? Eventually, 2 or 3 iterations down the line, they sense that, okay, if this is an investment I make around inclusion, it pays back to me in a very different way. So unless and until they see that sort of a connection, I really don't see how private sector will be driven by these sorts of decisions. But having said that, sometimes, these days, my big belief is in market, right? Ultimately, consumers can drive a lot of behavioral changes even by innovators. Like, for instance, a lot of retail agricultural output companies today increasingly are going for certifications around fair trade practices, or that they are sourcing from women farmers. It's not random, or it's not a charity that they're doing. They sense that when you bring that sort of a labeling, the consumer also appreciates that and is more likely to make a purchase decision, which translates into an economic decision. So part of my hope and belief is that we should, as CGIAR, as the not-for-profit community, we should also be making those advocacy, we should be trying to bring that advocacy which fundamentally also changes the behavior of the consumers as well as the investors.
So can we summarize that as the not-for-profit community still needs to acknowledge that profit is important?
Absolutely.
It doesn't work without profit.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks. Berta, is there another question to ask?
Yeah, I think I have another question for Fong. So, Fong, if you maybe this is coming from say Taiwan, and I'm shortening it because it's very detailed. But if you have any examples of how combining digital and not digital disseminations have support to address these barriers and to achieve higher adoption and impactful engagement.
Sorry, can you come again?
So how the combination of digital and non digital dissemination methods has support to increase the outreach of your tools. If you have an example there.
Yes. So so the non-digital way to disseminate this would probably be similar to what we have done in the 2 projects that we did in Vietnam and Thailand, where we worked through the existing channels in the supply chain, like the middleman, the brokers, and the agent who has existing relationship with the farmer in their supply chain, and use that as a way to reach farmer in an easier way. But of course, the long-term solution is to familiarize those farmers with the use of IVF, for example, so they get to trust the numbers calling, and or with in the app. In the smartphone app story would about like to get farmer to get used to the use of the app and see the benefit of it, so that eventually we'll be able to use these digital tools to communicate more and more with these farmer and less through the non-digital channel, and increase the efficiency and scalability of our digital intervention.
Wong, thank you very much. That was excellent last words for the seminar. We are now coming to an end. So thank you very much, Wong from the Alliance, Sasha from YOX, Sulakshana from Viamo, and Ram from ILRI, and Berta from the Alliance, and Samuel for facilitating the session. Thank you, everyone. I think you can reach out to all panelists via their emails. If you're wondering, you can just Google them, or panelists can, if they're interested, quickly post their emails here in the chat. Otherwise, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening, morning, day, wherever you are. Thank you.